This is pretty overwhelming. There are so many people, including the 3 other people that graduated with me in the doctorate program, deserving of such an honor. I'm very grateful for the time that I spent at BYU, all 14 years of it. It's a lot of tuition. And the degrees and the relationships. Thank you. Thank you for the work that you do, the work that you're going to do, and the support that you provide for public education. My personal motto is, kindness is the mother of peace, and public education is her spinster aunt. And I believe deeply in the power of public education to improve economic situations and political situations. And I love the work that I do. I love the work that I do here in the state of Utah. I love the work that I do internationally. And I am just really grateful for all the people who contribute and to that work and who support me personally and support the work of public education. And especially today, my father always says that those people that we love who are not closely related by DNA, because we're all related, but who are not closely related by DNA, he calls family of the heart. And today especially, I'm grateful to Melissa and to Ellie and to Lane and to Lynn and to Richard. And I consider them family of the heart. And I'm grateful for the actual family who is also sitting here. But BYU in general is family of the heart to me. So thank you. So I want to tell you about a devastating new diagnosis. Initiative overload. This is a diagnosis that has several scary symptoms, okay? So local education agencies, which in Utah are charter schools and school districts, that fail to meet required achievement targets have to participate in improvement activities. Local education agencies that want to improve participate in improvement activities. And we have a problem in Utah that we have a very hard time funding public education. So LEAs are caught in a spot where they want to take every single dollar that is available to them. So they apply for every initiative that is available. And very often, the staff who apply for one initiative don't know that the staff who are applying for another initiative have done so. There's no relationship. They have no idea. They're just money grabbing for the sake of improvement. But any resource, any increase of resource is really helpful. All those initiatives have reporting requirements. The legislature sets them up, the State Board of Education sets them up, the district or charter board sets them up, the feds set them up. So what we have seen at the State Board of Education is this phenomenon of initiative overload. LEAs that have, like this example right here, that have a population of about 300 students involved in 9 significant improvement initiatives. So you're talking about a faculty of 15, 1 administrator, 14 teachers-ish, who are participating in 9 significant improvement initiatives. And that's a little overwhelming. And they don't know when they're coming and going. They don't know how to keep track of the funding. They don't know how to evaluate the activities. So what I have been working on for the last couple years is finding an antidote to initiative overload. So let me tell you about the research that has been leading to our clinical trials. So first of all, let me give you the historical landscape. In 1314, the federal government was at a point where Congress had not yet, and still hasn't. But in 1314, they had not reauthorized the Individuals with Disabilities Education Act, which is a requirement. They required it of themselves, and yet they failed to do that. And so the Department of Education was stuck determining how states and territories would be held accountable for all the federal money that we get through IDEA, which is about 9% of the funding that LEAs in the state of Utah use. It's a significant amount of funding. And it's about $150 million, okay? So the previous accountability system, which had been in place, called the State Performance Plan, been in place for 6 years, and the states and territories were required to report annually to the feds on 20 indicators of compliance with the implementation of the IDEA. But the Federal Register, so the regulations, IDEA is the statute or the law, but the regulations, which are the how-to parts of the law, were expiring, and the Department of Education needed to come up with something different. So they actually talked to us. They came and talked to states, they talked to advocacy groups, and we all agreed that we were doing a pretty good job across the country with compliance of the IDEA, but we needed to actually look at the purpose of the IDEA, which is to improve outcomes, post-high school outcomes for students with disabilities. So we all agreed as a nation that we should change the accountability system and include some results indicators. So the feds did that. They decreased the required compliance indicators by 5 and added a new indicator, a results indicator called the State Systemic Improvement Plan, and every state and territory in the nation was responsible for this. So the feds required that that each state and territory participate in a comprehensive data analysis and a comprehensive infrastructure analysis to determine what one of our biggest, ugliest gaps was. And that then we would come up with a plan to address that big, ugly gap. Utah approached this a little bit differently than any other state or territory in the nation, with some pretty visionary leadership from our previous state director of special education, Glenna Gallo. We hired a contracted statistician. We examined every piece of data that was available to us at the State Board of Education related to general education students and special education students and compared them, every piece of data we could find. Glenna and I and another individual, Devin Healy, sat with our contracted statistician for 3 8-hour days reviewing this data and determined what Utah's biggest, ugliest gap was. And at the time, in 1314, we were administering the criterion reference tests, the CRTs. So if you know about statewide assessment in Utah, you know that we just finished administering 5 years of a SAGE test. We're moving on to a new test, but at the time we did this data analysis, we were administering the CRTs. On the CRTs, the biggest, ugliest gap between general education and special education was middle school mathematics. The math scores for students in grades 6 through 8. And Utah's scores looked very similar to nationwide scores. We have a huge cliff, the middle school math cliff at 6th grade, where scores just start dropping off, partly because of the abstract nature of the Common Core, the increased rigor in the Common Core, and partly because teachers do not have the content knowledge and the pedagogical knowledge to be able to provide Tier 1 universal instruction and then intervention. So we did this huge data analysis, and then we did an infrastructure analysis. The data analysis that we had done, nobody at the State Board of Education had ever, that was there at the time, ever remembered something that comprehensive being done. So then we took the next step. We analyzed all the systems that were available from the state board level and at the LEA level to determine what we had in place that could help us look at that gap, what we had in place that might be contributing to that gap, and what we were completely missing. So then we did another visionary thing, which not me again, but the feds required that we get stakeholder input about creating this plan. So instead of creating a group of stakeholders who all came into a room and talked to us about our data analysis and our infrastructure analysis, we took that information to over 100 focus groups around the state. Instead of bringing someone in from the PTA, we went to the PTA and talked to everybody who would listen. Instead of bringing someone in from the state board, from the local board association, we went to the Utah Association of School Boards. Instead of bringing somebody in from the Principals Association, we went to them. And we shared this data with thousands of people across the state. Some of you participated in those focus groups. And everybody in Utah agreed, middle school math, our biggest, ugliest gap. So as a result, we moved into the next part of our research and development. We moved into creating an implementation plan for improvement and evaluation plan. And that was year 2. And just to tell you, my dissertation committee, who were wonderful to me, I needed them when we did this. The data analysis, the infrastructure analysis, and creating the implementation and evaluation plan was considerably more work than my dissertation was. The report that we sent to the feds was 110 pages long and had a literature review, reports of all the stakeholder groups that we had gone to, and really intensely looked at what we have in place in Utah to be able to address this math cliff and what we don't have in place. So it didn't at the time, but still don't have in place to be able to address this cliff. So here's some of the data quickly. Okay, so SWD stands for Students with Disabilities. So the middle school math proficiency of general education students at the time, now remember this is the CRTs, so if you pull up the data gateway today, you won't be able to see this data because the data gateway is simply full of SAGE data, okay? So at the time, we have a 37% proficiency rate for general education students, and we had a 15% proficiency rate for students with disabilities in the same grades. That's hideous. Okay, so let's say we have about 100 people, I don't know, but let's say we have 100 people in this room. You guys, to my mom and my niece and Ellie, you guys get to be proficient. All the rest of you don't. You don't get to be proficient in middle school, which means you're not going to be proficient in high school, which means you're going to be taking Math 99 4 times, according to the governor's report, drop out of your freshman year at Salt Lake Community College, and be sitting in your parents' basement playing video games 5 years later. And none of that is an exaggeration, because all of that data is data that we were able to analyze when we did the data analysis. That was the path that we were seeing students with disabilities take. Okay, so we also did a huge survey. We had over 1,500 people respond, 1,500 Utahns respond to a survey about what do we believe in the state of Utah about the math proficiency and about academic achievement in general and about students' ability to master grade level content. You can see several of the things that we learned here. That first bullet is a really important bullet. The system is not providing a tiered system of supports to prevent students from failing. Okay, over half of the people who responded to our survey said that we were contributing, we as educators were contributing to the issue. And unfortunately, if you look at the bullet about teachers, number 2, Utah educators didn't have the skills to serve students on IEPs. And then IEPs further on. IEPs are not being informed by the needs of the student and the data of the student, but by parent and special education teacher desire. Now, we found an interesting thing when we did this survey, that our data looked very similar to national data. And what we found is that special education teachers and parents had lower expectations for their students with disabilities than general education teachers and the students themselves. Special education teachers and parents expected less. Math teachers, general education math teachers expected more from students with disabilities than special education teachers. That's a problem. If special education teachers and parents don't believe that students with disabilities can master grade level content, what are we doing? Why are we spending all of those federal dollars? Why am I writing a dissertation annually about the work that we're doing in Utah? Okay, that was the really horrifying piece of data that we found, but unfortunately it matched Utah data. So matched national data, excuse me. So in our infrastructure analysis, here are a list of the things that we found that were keeping Utah from being able to help students with disabilities master grade level content, especially in middle school. Okay? People at the State Board of Education were not working together. We didn't even know, people in special education didn't even know the names of people in teaching and learning, who didn't know the names of people in federal programs in Title I, which is a whole school improvement process, right? We didn't know the names of the people in CTE. The work we were doing was completely siloed, and of course we saw the same thing in LEAs. We were only analyzing student group data for accountability, not for improvement. NCLB required that we analyzed student group data, but then we didn't do anything with it, except when it came to students living in poverty, because Title I requires that you have improvement activities for students living in poverty. But once we did the data analysis, it just went off somewhere into the data gateway and nothing ever happened with it. So special education teachers and administrators were not being included in the professional development. The millions of dollars of professional development that were being provided by state taxpayer dollars, or taxpayer money, to general education teachers. Special education teachers weren't being invited. Nobody ever told them about it. Okay? So we found all of these issues. One of the issues that we found, the very bottom bullet, educator preparation programs were not being held accountable to provide secondary content to special education teachers. I personally did an analysis of the course requirements and the content of the courses of each educator preparation program for special education across the state of Utah, and found at the time 2 courses. We have 8 special education educator preparation programs in the state. 2 courses that were specific to secondary content. If we're expecting special education teachers to be able to provide specially designed instruction to students with disabilities, they have to know the content. And education preparation programs were not providing it. Okay? So there are infrastructure problems. Okay, at LEAs, we saw the same kind of infrastructure problems. Okay, general education instruction was being replaced, not supplemented by, as required by law. Okay, it was being replaced by specially designed instruction. So we found 10,000 of 76,000 students with disabilities who were being hidden from accountability. They were not being assigned courses that would put them into an assessment. They weren't taking the test. Now, if you think about the fact that only 15% of the middle school math students were proficient, but 10,000 of the students were not actually taking the test. You have to wonder, if some of those students took the test, would our proficiency be higher or would our proficiency be lower? Significant number of students. We found one junior high, which I will not name, in the north part of the state, where with 142 students with disabilities, and not a single one of them took the test. Because the administrator at that school did not want them to make him look bad, and so he hid them. He did not put them in courses that would allow them to take the test. 10,000 kids we hid from taking the test. We also have an equity issue, obviously. Okay? So we had off-grade level instruction happening across the state. We had off-grade level tests being taken across the state. So if you don't get the 6th grade instruction and then you take the 6th grade test, how could you possibly pass it? That makes no sense. So we identified, unfortunately, through this data analysis, a phrase that we have not so lovingly coined at the State Board of Education, fraction hell. In the Common Core, fractions are introduced at 3rd grade. You spend a lot of time on them in 4th grade. And we had students all over the state of Utah in 11th and 12th grade still working on fractions in 3rd, in 4th, in 5th, blah, 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 blah. Who wants to stay in school when all you do is fractions for 7 straight years? Why? What would be your motivation for continuing? But if you can't master fractions in 4th grade and your special education teacher only has the content knowledge to be able to provide instruction for you through 5th grade content, what else is he or she going to teach you? But you keep taking the test. If your administrator allows it, you keep taking the test and you fail every single year. And your parents show up to your IEP and you review the test and your teacher tells you, oh, failed again, not proficient again. Well, you didn't get the content. You don't have a chance to pass the test. Okay, so we identified these really, really scary infrastructure gaps. So we created a hypothesis. If we worked on 3 things, okay? If we improved our expectations for students with disabilities, if we improved the content knowledge and the pedagogy of our teachers, and if we provided a system of supports, good, core, universal instruction, and then for any struggling student, not just for a student with disabilities, but for any struggling student, we provided intervention. We might be able to improve that gap. In fact, we were hoping that we would be able, in 5 years, we'd be able to cut that gap in half. Okay? So that was our hypothesis, and we moved into our research and development phase 2. We started implementing activities to be able to cut that gap in half. Okay, so we started a public relations firm. I'm an educator, a psychologist. I know nothing about public relations. I didn't even know where to start. But what I do know is how to write an RFP. So we wrote an RFP. We interviewed public relations firms. We showed them our data. We showed them our infrastructure analysis. And we said, people need to believe that students with disabilities can master grade level content. People need to believe and expect them to do it. People need to believe that we, in public education, can provide good core instruction and can provide the supports that students need to achieve, okay? And that was some of the best $30,000 that your taxes have spent, okay? Because they just went about right and left bringing people into the conversation. They brought legislators into the conversation. They brought NPR into the conversation. We've had articles in newspapers. We've had articles on the radio. We've had Twitter chats. We have been in Ed Week 4 times with the work that we're doing. And we're sending out that survey again next month. And we really hope that all of the work that we're doing is making a difference. We believe that it is with some of the other data that we have. A couple other things we did. We worked with the Utah Parent Center to provide an innovative way to get parents the message. We sent over 600 parents, some of whom were also teachers, but we were targeting parents of students with disabilities. 600 parents, the book Mindset by Carol Dweck. We sent it to them in the mail. We set up online book studies where parents could meet with us on an evening, a couple times a month, read a couple chapters of the book. We sent them questions and discussion topics, and then we got together in front of a computer and we talked to parents about mindset. We talked to parents about their students with disabilities. We talked to parents about the things that they say to their students, which either encourage them to achieve or encourage them to back away from achievement. And we had wonderful conversations. This year, so we've done that for 2 years in a row. Over 600 parents have participated with us. Ellie helped us with it in our last round of sessions and came to be one of our facilitators. This year, we're doing the same thing. We're reading the book Grit. If any of you want to participate, you get a free book if you show up. So we have had wonderful conversations and discussions with parents around the state about how to think about helping our students with disabilities achieve. Okay, we worked with the Utah Parent Center and an amazing woman, Karen Conder, who is the vice president for special needs for the Utah PTA, to help her create a resolution for high expectations for students with disabilities. The Utah PTA passed it last year. The national PTA adopted that resolution in June because of her work. Amazing work. So other things that we've done. We have 12 LEAs in the state of Utah that are working on pilot projects that we are supporting with either funding or expertise to be able to improve middle school math in their particular LEAs. They're all doing different things based on the data analysis and the infrastructure analysis that we did before them and with them. And some of those projects have had amazing results. Our favorite project, we've had 4 cohorts of middle school mathematics co-teaching projects going across the state. And many of these LEAs have participated. When students with disabilities participate in a co-taught math class with a content expert and a special education teacher, not only are 95% of the students with disabilities able to master the content, but the general education student scores also improve. Because special educators can provide specially designed instruction to all struggling learners, not just the students with disabilities. The data we have gathered, which Utah State is actually analyzing for us and will be publishing soon, on co-teaching, content-embedded co-teaching between a content expert, a general education content expert, and a special education teacher is daunting. It's beautiful. It's really making a difference. So we've also been providing supports for content knowledge and effective instruction and multi-tiered systems of supports to educators. We have conferences. We have book studies. We have regional meetings. We have 38 LEAs across the state that are receiving systems and instructional coaching to either set up or to scale up their multi-tiered system of supports. Not all of them are working on math. Many of them are working on behavior or literacy, but the fact that they are doing the work to implement and scale up a multi-tiered system of supports is fantastic. So exciting. So we have initial results, but we needed to figure out if the results that we were seeing were just the placebo effect. Okay, so first year of implementation, our goal was that we would improve middle school math by 2.22%, and we did nothing. Okay, the only thing we did the first year was talk about improvement. We didn't provide conferences, we didn't provide workshops, we didn't do the book study yet. We just talked and talked and talked about expectations, beliefs, content knowledge, pedagogy, and multi-tiered systems of support. And we improved middle school math by 1.6%. Almost made our goal. Statistically significantly more than general education improved that year. And we did nada. So year two, we started implementing. We started working with LEAs. We did the book study. We worked with the PTA. We provided all sorts of professional learning opportunities to educators across the state. In year two, we made 1.2% growth. We still didn't meet our target, but still statistically significant improvement over general education. So 2 years in a row, statistically significant improvement over general education. If special education improves more than general education, we're bridging the gap, right? We have to make at least as much progress as general education and then a little bit more in order to bridge that gap. 2 years in a row we did it. Last year, data analysis, we ended up here. Ooh, I have a light. So we actually regressed. We decreased by a little bit. And we groaned, and we were horrified, and we were sad because we'd spent an enormous amount of energy. I'd written my third dissertation, and we regressed. And then we got out the general education data. General education decreased by 4% last year, and special education maintained. That was actually our biggest improvement. General education in the state of Utah last year, all math students, proficiency decreased. But special education, just barely. We actually made the biggest gain, sort of, the biggest gain across all student groups, across all ways of analyzing the SAGE test. So you will probably wonder what is happening there, right? Well, you probably also know we have a state law about opt-out, and students can opt out of taking the statewide assessments. Last year, the last couple years, the number of students who have opted out has increased. More than 7% of students with disabilities opted out last year, and this past year, and between 5 and 6% of general education students opted out. And when we analyzed the students who had taken the test the year before and then opted out this year, we found that the majority of those students had been proficient the previous year. So the number of students who were proficient who took the test decreased. And unfortunately, the same thing happened this year in special education. It did not happen in general education. The number of students who took the test increased in general education. It decreased in special education. So the math is getting really complicated. But that's okay, because that's what we do. This is all about math, right? Okay. So we don't have the results yet, and we'll have the results in about 3 weeks for the recent administration of the SAGE. And I just have no idea what we're going to see. But I have absolute faith that we have made a difference, that the work that educators in the state of Utah, that the work that parents in the state of Utah are doing is making that improvement. This is not a placebo effect. Okay? We are making progress. So the next phase, reveal the antidote. So we've spent an enormous amount of time looking at all of the different activities that we have done to be able to figure out which of the activities is the activity, which made the difference. Of course, that's ridiculous. No one thing makes all the difference. But we have found something very significant. Convergence, okay? So this is the collaboration continuum, adapted from these wonderful researchers from about a decade ago. This is a framework for looking at how we do our work. We were introduced to the collaboration continuum right about the time that we did the data analysis and the infrastructure analysis. And because when we did our infrastructure analysis, because at the top of the list we recognized that we were working in silos, that we were not working together, that we didn't know one another, that we didn't know each other's data, that we didn't know anything about what the rest of the people were doing in the building, and the LEAs had the same problem, we decided that one of the things that we would implement as an activity was collaboration. This is difficult because of all the different funding streams. When you have this funding stream for this activity, and this funding stream for this activity, and this funding stream for this activity, working together becomes difficult, and we're all busy. In fact, I had a conversation with Johnny Collette, the Assistant Secretary of OSERS, on Saturday morning, and he asked me, he's like, Leah, how are you? And I said, I'm good. Busy, but good. I said, Johnny, how are you? He said, I'm good. Busy, but good. And then he stopped and he said, let's just get rid of the busy. We're all busy. Let's just drop it. Let's not tell each other anymore how busy we are. Let's just tell each other whether we're good or not. And I thought that was a great idea. And since I talked to Johnny on Saturday, I've not said one single time that I'm busy. And it's really hard, because I am. But we decided that we needed to figure out how we could move from having the same goal, wanting the same outcome, to actually having an infrastructure that supported convergent work, okay? So here's the definition of convergence here. And this is what we decided would be our health marker. If we were really figuring out what the antidote was, this would be our marker. So I have some visual aids. That first year, we went around to the entire building, the State Board of Education. We had every department and every specialist who would show up. Think about all the work that they did, every single initiative that they worked on, and put their name on, put a Post-it note on the collaboration continuum to tell us how well they thought we were collaborating in the building. This is where we were, right here. People didn't even know each other's names, so they weren't collaborating, okay? So we presented that to the superintendent, we presented that to the state board, we said this is not okay. Middle school math for students with disabilities is not going to improve until general education plays with us, until CTE plays with us, until Title I plays with us. And the superintendent looked at me and went, yeah, you think you can do that? I said, give me some power, give me some authority, give me the checkbook, and I can do it. So year 2, here we are, year 2, okay? Year 1, didn't even make it on the collaboration continuum. Okay, year 2. Okay, these are all of the projects, all the initiatives that were going on in the building, the major ones, I didn't put them all on here, but all the major ones, and where the collaboration was. We know people's names, woo woo, Okay? We're starting to talk about shared activities. Yay! And this is some after-school programs. That after-school programs said, hey, we really want to make some improvements. We're going to go get people to help us. And this, right here, is the State Systemic Improvement Plan. This was a group of people who the secondary math specialist, Jolie Honey, and I got together from every instructional section of the building and said, look at that 22% gap. We've got to fix that. The only way we're going to do it is if we work together. In 1 year, that group of 16 people were able to not only implement all of those activities that I just showed you, but we're able to move the way we do work from not even knowing what's going on to sharing not only the goal making, but sharing budgets, sharing responsibility, sharing evaluation, okay? Year 3. Here we are, right here, year 3, okay? Moving towards shared resources. So everything that we did in all of these initiatives right here, everything that we did was blending funding, blending expertise, blending time, and all those other initiatives were moving closer to no silos in our building. Every single person knows every other person's name and all of the initiatives that they're responsible for, okay? So we, as a result of that collaboration, all sorts of collaboration is now happening. This is phase 3. We have improved middle school math. In fact, the IDC, which is the IDEA Data Center, a technical assistance center for the federal government, for the Department of Education, gave Utah a little award last year for the statistically significant improvement in our maths, in our middle school math scores. Even though we have never hit a target, we have made more growth than almost all other states and territories by working together. And as a result of that, all of this collaboration is now happening in the building. We called that group of 16 people who started working on those activities the Cross-Department SSIP Implementation Team, the CDIT. And now we have all of these other CDITs happening in our building. And we know that this works. We have LEAs that are taking what we are modeling at the State Board of Education and are implementing it at their level because they recognize that it works. Because we have data that demonstrates we can improve student outcomes. So, once again, thank you. Thank you.